Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Our subject is empowering innovation through the SBIR program. We have an awesome panel today. Dave Roska, Chief Executive Officer and Founder of AI Strategy Corporation. Mike Ristom, Innovation Strategy with the Air Force Strategic Studies Group, Office of Disruptive Thinking, and Josh Kramer, Chief Revenue Officer at United Global Technologies. My name is Michael Crosby. I'm the CEO of Leadership Connect. Quick overview for everyone. So we're going to go through a number of topics that the panelists and I have prepared for everyone over the next hour. As we go through, if you have questions, please put them on the Q&A chat. The audience today is a practitioner audience, so we have people from SBIR companies, people at federal agencies, and then what we think of as the kind of technology, policy, and procurement ecosystem on the call today. So looking forward to a lively discussion. So first, we'll start with panelists' intros, just a little bit on your background, your experience with the SBIR program. And Dave, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate being here. Thanking everybody for coming in and being part of this webinar today. So my background, been developing technologies for over 35 years, and started off in aerospace and defense, automotive, electronics, raw materials, and both on the technology side as well as the business side. And sort of my last big gig before the startup that I'm in now, I used to run Dayton T. Brown, which is the largest privately owned test lab in the country for the DoD. And we had a lot of TRL 6 through TRL 9 technologies there. But personally, as far as the SBIRs go, I never really counted them up, but north of 20 different SBIRs, that were awarded and managed and developing those technologies. And most of them actually did go to phase 2s and transition as well. So good track record with, how to do it. It's sort of a little bit different every time. But our latest SBIR, which is with this company, AI Strategy and 9 High now, actually is part of, it's transitioning from being an SBIR awardee, phase 1, 2, and 3, to actually being part of the ecosystem now. We're actually building out a scouting module that can help with understanding what technologies can succeed for selection, and then helping with human AI collaboration to bring technologies all the way through to the warfighter. So we're trying to use our technologies to make the ecosystem better and more successful. Over.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for the invitation and for the opportunity to participate. I'm Michael Ristom. I'm a lieutenant colonel type in the United States Air Force. I've been in the Air Force for approximately 15 years. I came in as a flyer. I still do that a little bit. As you get older, you start to spend less time in the cockpit and more time on a desk. I started flying my flying career in manned and unmanned aircraft, primarily ISR and strike platforms. Then I transitioned out of Air Combat Command into Air Force Special Operations Command, flying the CV-22. While I was at Hurlburt Field in the command, I had an opportunity by invite of the wing commander to stand up AFSOC's first formal Spark cell, or we used to call them innovation cells at the time before it was more formalized than it is now. While I was there, I had a small team, 2 to 3 people, and rapidly learned all of the things that I had no knowledge about, like colors of money and contracting vehicles, right? All of the things that are hyper important in the SBIR space, but as a pilot were not important to me at the time, and obviously until they were. So I had an opportunity to put about 12 SBIR companies on contract between phase 1 and 2 since about 2018. My most recent one was last year when I was a fellow in the CSAP's Blue Horizons Fellowship, which is a formal PME education program. That SBIR was a direct phase 2 and then transitioned to a phase 3, and it's got a little over $67 million allocated to it, towards it now with between the Space Force and Air Force. And I think that's about it. Thanks, Michael.
Awesome, Mike. Thank you. I like the analogy of like going from the cockpit to the desk. I don't know if that ever happens in reverse, but sounds cool.
I'll let you know next year.
All right. And last but not least, Josh.
Thanks so much for having me here. My name is Josh Kramer. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer over at Global Technologies. Unlike Mike, I've never spent time in a plane. I spent the last 15 years in the government contracting community, almost exclusively on the DoD side of things. Most recently at a company called Blue Voyant, I helped them take their phase 1, 2, 3 supply chain risk product across the rest of the DoD. So I was responsible for helping organizations stand up the commercialization piece of their SBIR product and service that they brought to the marketplace. So I love to talk about these topics, and certainly glad to be a part of the panel here and talk through some of these things. Over.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. And I'm Michael Crosby. I'm CEO of Leadership Connect. We're a decision intelligence business. So we look at best practices, help people connect amongst the public sector ecosystem. We spent a fair amount of time analyzing best practices within the SBIR program, looking at patterns of behavior within SBIR awardees and offices that lead to success. And so it's great to have this session today where we can talk about insights and best practices. I have piloted a Cessna, but I consider that it's like the paper airplane of the Air Force world. All right, so let's get to the first topic. We spent a fair amount of time with this in prep, looking at matching capability to mission need. SBIR program and emerging technology is all about complementing innovation to mission need within Department of Defense. Read a good stat that there's about 25,000 small businesses in the defense industrial base against 5 main primes. And then in our analysis, there's about 300 offices funding SBIR activity just within Department of Defense. There's close to that amount out, within civilian agencies. You have a lot of turnover as well. So the people run those offices are generally turning over every couple of years. So maybe we'll start with Mike. Like, how do you go about matching, mission need with capability? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. That's a tough one. And before I get into that, I forgot to drop my standard government disclaimer that I'm not speaking for the DoD or the United States Air Force. The reason why I'm here is to share a perspective from somebody who is an inexperienced TPOC throughout the SBIR process. So all of the things that are wrapped up with that, we'll just button that up and move that over. To answer your question, that is really difficult to do. Even with the primes at times, and when we talk about matching a need or a capability with a warfighter in the government, we talk about requirements all the time, right? And the longer you're in, the more you learn that there's like big R requirements, which are things that go through the formalized process. Somebody at the unit says, hey, I need this thing. It goes up through a wing and a MAGCOM, and then it makes it up to that headquarters Air Force staff, for example, and then it goes into this entire POM process and meets requirement boards along the way. But the unique thing about this SBIR process is you don't need any of that to engage with the TPOC, right? So you can have a warfighter, and I think that spans across a wide spectrum of what you define a warfighter as. But they can reach out through the AFWorks team and say, hey, we have this need. During the open topic, we would like to source companies to solve this for us. Or during the specific topic call, we would like to do that. I will, full disclosure, say out loud in front of everybody that we need to come up with a better way to do that. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement. A lot of what happens is, and we'll get to this a little bit later here, maybe even the next question is, we talked about inadvertent duplication, right? Or ignorant duplication of efforts. So what we've seen in the space, and something that my office is working on, is a way to clearly communicate on the government side what other people are doing in the innovation space, especially in the SBIR space. So that's probably unsatisfying and vague enough of an answer, but it's tough to do. And unless you know the right people and you can get vectored through very individualized engagements, it's hard to find the right person at times.
Thanks, Mike. Dave, what are your thoughts on matching mission need to capability?
Sure. So I would there's probably three main points I want to make here. One is sort of the evolution that I've seen over like the last 5 to 7 years in different branches that use SBIR. So Army, Navy, Air Force have some sort of almost different styles in how they manage and how they conduct SBIRs, right? And but what I want to also so I'll talk about that, but I also want to talk about a little bit about sort of the differences between what people may be familiar with in commercial markets and with commercial customers compared to the environment that you have more in the government and SBIRs for those newer companies. So first of all, as far as what's been happening in the last 5 to 7 years, there's been a little bit of a shift. At least it was noticeable to me that they really prefer companies now that are sort of already established and have technologies in the commercial market. These SBIR by definition is all dual use technologies, meaning that they have commercial as well as military applications with typically some sort of modifications or additional capabilities or at least higher security and that sort of thing for DoD markets. So in the past, when I started getting into SBIRs like 15 years ago or so, they were a little more open to having startups come in, with just say military first, and then also launching sort of simultaneously on the commercial side. But there's more risk to that. So they'd like to see companies now that are already in the commercial side and can transition that technology over to the military market, because you always want the healthier companies to be there. You don't want somebody who's completely relying on on only government funding, especially early on when the sort of lapses in Congress approving budgets, for example, and other issues that you might have along the way. That could be a little disruptive to cash flow, which is just incredibly important to a small business. So that's one aspect that I've seen that's changed a little bit. But now talking a little bit about the differences between the commercial markets and dealing with the government and dealing with SBIRs. A lot of things are actually in common. There's a lot of similar things. You really need to know your customer. You need to understand what their pain points are and what they're trying to do and sort of how they operate and what their priorities are. So that part of it's no different whatsoever. But what is different, I definitely encourage new companies that are coming in to get involved with different events that are going on. There's plenty of them. There's a lot of consortia. There's, like for example, ABI Corporation runs over 30 different consortia for the federal government. And there's other consortia that are around. And it's a good way to network and get to know people, again, not just virtual like we're doing now, but also in person. And you can go to these things, understand meet people face to face, understand what some of their pain points are, because actually in some of those consortia where there's say CUI types of data or information that's transferred, you can't get that necessarily, through any public solicitations that are out there. So you can get to have the next level of information by getting more involved with the communities. So in that way, that's very much the same as the commercial markets. Get to know your customer, work with them, understand the pain points. How can you make things better for them along the way? What's different about things, again, are, sometimes it's just access in the first place, or even understanding what some of the more sensitive issues are that need to be resolved. That's where you need to, like I said, maybe join an organization that lets you attend some events where there is some CUI information that's disclosed, and you can understand a little bit more about specifically what some of the needs are. So between that and honestly, just a lot of the, contracting requirements. So for example, like we're doing a direct to phase 2 right now, and there's DD 2345 is required, and some people have no idea what a DD 2345 is, right? But it's one of those documents that can take a little bit of time to get and to get approved along the way. And if you don't have that in hand, it may preclude you from actually responding to an opportunity that you think you're perfect for. So there's some background that you have to do with the government side, and that's actually something we're trying to do with 9 High, is trying to get a little better understanding, a little better of scouting and understanding of the needs in the government versus the technologies that are available in a little more of an open forum, in a scouting forum, before you get into all that kind of contracting work. So we're trying to use our platform to move a lot of that discovery to the left before you get into some of the more complicated contracting. And that's sort of the other big difference. Over.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. Or sorry, thanks, Dave. Josh, you were a big advocate for the parallels between commercial and public sector engagement are not as the differences are not as stark as people think they are. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the benefit of going after both Mike and David is I get to kind of tie in a couple of points from both of them. I think Mike made a great point that, it's kind of hard to know if there's a duplicative technology or something similar going on that's being evaluated in another part of the DoD or another agency that is using SBIR. And I think David makes a great point. You really need to understand who you're reaching out to, what these organizations do and what their priorities are. And the great thing about this market is a lot of it's published out there. You can go on a NAVC website and go 7 layers deep and know what each program office cares about the most. And I think the most important piece from there is, to David's point, is having that conversation. Here's what my company does, or here's what we think we can do. How would this help you? And in those conversations, I've found that the government, especially on the DoD side, is more than open to tell you if this is something that maps what they're looking for, or if this is duplicative. And they'll say, hey, you sound like company X who does this. And you might not know who they are, but it can help you understand, hey, am I being duplicative? Or is there another angle that I'm coming from here that I think meets a need, and really build a case from there that either you want to run through the SBIR program or bring in, commercial tech that you already have, whatever the case may be. But I think it really comes down to the fundamental pieces of having those conversations up front before you say, hey, I want to go after these things and build this, and not have the understanding of what's going on in these offices and what potential duplicativeness is across the board here. So I tie in both Mike and David's pieces that, it's really important to know who you're talking to, what their priorities are, and then being willing to have those conversations to really understand what you should be bringing to market and how you should position that.
That's great. Thanks, Josh. And you touched on duplicity. So, Mike, you had mentioned deliberate duplicity. There's definitely a value of continuing to build on things versus duplicity of ignorance, where you're not aware of something that's going on. Clearly, like most offices within the DoD, I don't think there's too many people who are saying they're flush with resources to do outreach and market research. Maybe that exists someplace, but I've never heard it. And when you look at something like AI, which is the number one area within SBIR that is getting funding, the cool thing about that is it's a technical solution often to a non-technical problem, which means maybe the requirements don't exist because people aren't aware that the capability exists. So maybe again, maybe Mike, we'll start with you on this. Can you talk about the notion of duplicity and building on something versus ignorance, and how much research is the right amount of research given practical time constraints within a DoD office?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk about it from, again, the wing Spark Cell level versus a large government program office, like a SPO type environment. So I'll tell you, when I first got started, a lot of the tools that are in place now didn't exist, or they weren't well known within the military specifically in terms of market research type tools. Now, AFWERX, I'm going to talk a lot about AFWERX because AFWERX is the lead for doing SBIRs in the Air Force. Obviously, each branch of service has their own, and then there are other government agencies that engage in OSD level efforts at the SBIR level. But there are tools that exist where a military member can go in if they know the tool exists, or they talk with a KO or a contracting officer, and just put in some keywords and say, hey, what has been done in the SBIR space on this topic? And it's very generalized, right? It's not super detailed, but then at least The interesting part about this is this topic specifically. Is the government traditionally has been okay with having one problem and finding one vendor to provide one solution. I think what we're open to now is a very deliberate look at duplication of efforts. So if I, as a person with a problem, wanted to put 3 or 4 separate companies on a phase 1, phase 2, and keep the problem statement the same, there is an opportunity to do that. It does raise some eyebrows from a fraud, waste, and abuse perspective. Like, why are you doing that? But if you can clearly articulate many times to your contracting officer who's willing to write that contract for you, I think there is value there. And what you show is, and we do this in small teams in the Air Force now through the design process and working through some complicated / complex problems, is you can have the most qualified person or people, the best, on one team, and you can have an average team of people with diverse experiences or backgrounds that may not be SMEs in the topic area. And then you can have your clown car of people, right, that don't have any experience. They don't have, they're not probably your top 10% of people that you would put towards a highly valuable project. And it's impressive to see the results that come out of those trials, right? But you're duplicating your efforts and you're trying to provide a solution to the same problem. So I think, to me, as long as you acknowledge that, yes, there is this other company that did this thing. If a small business comes to me and they say, hey, we did our market research, we know that these 2 other companies are doing this, but here's how we think we are different after assessing what they're doing, and this is what we understand your problem to be. We would like to try XYZ. I think that makes it much easier for me as a TPOC, as somebody asking the federal government to put money towards an effort. It makes it much easier for me to say yes, or at least continue conversations.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, I certainly would look at it specific to AI. The market's moving so quickly. So if you were to rank the top 5, vendors to solve a particular problem 6 months ago, and you went out and ranked them again today, it would definitely be a different order. So I certainly see the value of duplicity, because it's a market that's not standing still.
Absolutely, and we're working under the assumption that the government partner that you're trying to engage with even understands what AI is, right? Like, there is a lot of ambiguity surrounding AI, and if you're not a SME in that space, anytime I have a AI company come to me or the AI topic comes up, I reach out to my friends up at the MIT AI Accelerator, because we have their uniform wearing people up at MIT, and I start talking to them because I am not that guy.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Dave, you have some knowledge in this area. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, we actually are an AI company. 9High is a human AI collaborative for decision guidance to help people guide them through the valley of death, for new technologies. So 2 things. One, let me give you a different example. It's simpler. AI, you're right, Mike, gets into a whole cloud of murky things that are evolving so fast you can't keep track. But let me give you a simpler example. I was on a team previously where we're again, it was multiple phase 2s that were awarded for a sensor. Okay. And we use completely different types of technologies to address the problem. And we were both successful in delivering up to a point. But what happened is, this is actually, I believe it was a Navy SBIR. So the Navy has an interesting program called the FST program, which I think, honestly, the other services should take a look at, because the FST program, really, they do expos. I was just at one a couple of months ago down in Maryland, where they bring their phase 2 companies out and they have a conference, and they bring out, all, like, for example, all the PEOs from all the PMAs that NavAir, they'll bring in submarine folks, they'll bring in other ship folks, and it's an expo of these new technologies that are in phase 2. But what's nice is, even though, you might have 2 companies that are going after the same thing, it's a point of collaboration. They're small businesses, and depending on what their styles are, right? Because it's always, the different personalities, the company takes on the personality of the leadership. Some are willing to work together, some are not. But the ones that are collaborative and are willing to work together, they often can. They can actually kind of, come to an agreement about a way that they can mutually work together for both benefit. Because maybe, for example, one person has better control systems or better ways of doing things versus the actual sensing element of a sensor or something of that nature. But what I can speak to even more so is the AI side of it. So, like, for example, we built this AI platform. It uses like 12 different large language models, all kinds of complicated stuff. But what's important to understand about, like, for example, just giving ours as an example, we have a platform that uses like this novel guidance system in the first place. So we can actually bring in new types of AI algorithms into it, and we're very open to that. We're talking with several different AI companies that are larger than us. And meanwhile, we might be the platform that they'll be coming into, and they're sort of trying to, win us over a little bit. So it's kind of nice being a small business where you're actually open to collaborating and evolving, but it's up to the small business to do that. They need to drop their competitive guard a little bit, make sure that they have good legal agreements in place, make sure that they understand who they're dealing with and everything else along the way. But at the same time, small businesses really, you need to collaborate, especially with fast moving technologies, and you should be willing to work with other companies as well. So that's just one of my recommendations along the way.
Great, thanks, Dave. We have a lot of topics, so Josh, we're gonna switch topics on this one. We think of this as getting smart. So all of you have been in this space for a number of years. So the question is, if you were to have your current self talk to yourself years ago when you first got involved in SBIR, what would you tell yourself? What's important in terms of coming up to speed? I know my experience came a lot 2 years ago when the program was coming up for reauthorization, and we heard about SBIR mills, which kind of sounded like a puppy mill for some reason. People throwing out all this data. I'm like, do people really know that? Have they actually looked at it? So we went through and we crunched every SBIR award over the last 5 years and discovered that the notion of a SBIR mill didn't really exist to any significant extent. And if you benchmark the SBIR program against venture capital, it's actually more successful by a couple percentage points. So it's kind of eye-opening just looking at it from we don't have a policy axe to grind, but looking at it from the data. And we interviewed a number of people involved in the program. The former head of it would hold up a cell phone and say 70% of this cell phone comes from the SBIR program. I don't know if that's actually verifiable, but he would go out and promote the program that way, which is pretty cool. But maybe Josh, let's start with you. Like, what would you tell your younger, cooler self?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Probably two things is, upfront, don't just kind of fall in love with one office that's interested in what you're doing. Have those conversations across multiple offices and departments across the DoD, because they can provide you insight not only on how to build and kind of structure your service or your product that you're bringing to market, but also how to make it align with the use cases that work not only for them, but also across other areas of the DoD, because the DoD works cross-functionally very often, right? And if you're from the outside, if you're not from the DoD, you don't understand that and you don't know what goes on in the back end. But understanding that and willing to get your product in front of the folks that would be most interested in it, to get the feedback, to really hone in on what your value prop is incredibly invaluable, especially early on. You don't want to run down the gamut and find out you've only got maybe 2 or 3 buyers that interested in kind of a phase 3 or taking it larger, and you're like, well, why not, right? You want to know that early on. And then probably the second one that we learned the hardest was not everybody knows how to use a SBIR. Not everyone knows how to contract with it. Not everyone knows how to take advantage of the vehicle that's there. So while you might be at a SBIR event where they're like, this is the path to go, this is the best way to speed through procurement, the typical contracting officer or contracting shop in most organizations, at least 2 years ago, this was the case, wasn't as familiar. They don't know how to pull the trigger on these things and use it across, kind of pull from a different agency and use it within their agency. So there's a learning curve there that you have to be willing to help educate through, meaning you've got to know what they're working through and understand kind of where their challenges are and what's new in kind of contracting this way versus what's traditional, and being able to help guide that through, because if it's going to be hard or complicated, they don't want to put themselves at risk. And there's, definitely, contracting officers that have sat at these shops for 20 years are going to be more risk averse when it comes to these things. So just have an understanding that not everyone's going to know how to take advantage of these programs, and being willing to continue to have those discussions and make sure everyone's confident as they work through. And it starts with a great TPOC, right? No different than Mike's talk to. But I'd say that's kind of the 2 key things that I found most. If I could go back in time, I'd bring those 2 things with me for sure.
Great, thanks, Josh. And Mike, you were flying more back then, so you'll probably consider yourself cooler back in time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love going after Josh on a topic because listening to him spurred a lot of thoughts in my brain that I otherwise probably wouldn't have come up with myself. And yes, I was way cooler back then. Ask my wife; she'll probably tell you. So I have three general thoughts. The first thought I had was, as a TPOC, I should have gained more stakeholders across the DoD. I actually did when I was working in AFSOC, just due to the nature of the joint element that Air Force Special Operations Command works under within underneath the umbrella of Special Operations Command. Oftentimes reached out to Army, Marine, and Navy Special Operations and tried to get folks, and quite frankly, some of the SBIRs I took on were because I had some Navy SOF folks reach out to me and they're like, hey, we really believe in this company. We think they're doing great things, but we don't have the contracting vehicles or the time and money to get them into the SBIR program and get them approved. Can you do it for us? And we'll help as like a supplemental TPOC. So it was all informal, but above the board. So again, get more stakeholders across the force in the space. And the reason for that is because you get more people with more skin in the game from the government side, right? It ultimately increases the chances of success. The other piece that I would say there is, as a TPOC, I wish I wouldn't have taken on so many companies at one time, because I couldn't dedicate the resources and time to them that was necessary to maximize our opportunity for success. The second major topic that I would say is take more time to understand the problem and this proposed solution and why that solution is going to solve my problem. And then spend time working with the company to articulate that and continue to tell a story. We talked briefly in the prep session about pitching and the like. I worked with my SBIR company last year to specifically help them with products that were valuable to the customer instead of giving me the same products that you would give a venture capitalist. And then the third thing I would offer, and this is my final thing, is start thinking about your transition plan from day one. Working under the assumption that this thing goes well, not waiting for it to prove its value. You have to start thinking from a military government perspective. And I would hope that a SBIR company is asking the TPOC these questions, right? What's our funding plan for a phase 3? Or are we going to go from a phase 1 to a phase 2? Or are we going to take this phase 2? Or are we going to modify it and do another phase 2 because you're not comfortable going to a phase 3? Who has access to inputs on this? Do you have other stakeholders in the space that we can talk to? And then ultimately, who is going to get the thing that you're providing, whether it's a technology or a process or a widget or a whatever, right? So I probably exceeded my word count on the answer here, but there was a lot to unpack there in that question.
No, that's fantastic, Mike. And just quick follow-up, like you mentioned not like you wish you worked with maybe fewer SBIR companies. Like, is there ultimate range, like, hey, I can work with X number, or it's not that simple?
Yeah, not that simple. I think it depends on the size of your team. I was very inexperienced, so I didn't realize how much back and forth and access my SBIR companies needed to, for example, my government network, if they were going to build a robotic process automation for me, and they needed the data and the systems, and I didn't understand data architecture and how they could use it and dummy data, right? And like all of these, I mean, data is hard, and access to government data is even harder. So I would say if you have an experienced TPOC, they can probably handle more. If you have an experienced TPOC who has a competent team, they could probably take more on. If they're new, if you're dealing with a brand new TPOC, I would proceed with caution. Not saying don't work with them, right? Because you have to learn at some point, but just be ready to have some of these hard conversations. Be very deliberate with your words, etc.
Great, thanks for the follow-up. Dave, you've been involved in a couple dozen SBIR projects. Grizzled vet at this point. What would you tell your younger self?
A couple of actually mirroring the same things that Mike was just saying, but more from the commercial side of things. One is the experience base in the first place. So, I was actually much more comfortable working, say, with a more inexperienced TPOC, as I had more experience myself, and we knew we had a good solid plan of what to go into in the first place. But one of the things I got to say, one of the most important things that nobody does, okay, or very few people do, except for the people who actually go into a phase 3 along the way. You have to have your phase 3 plan and it almost not an agreement, but you have to have a sort of meeting of the minds with your TPOC and with your government customers of your phase 3 when you're in phase 1. A lot of people wait to the end of phase 1 to figure out what they're going to do for phase 2, wait to the end of phase 2 to figure out what they're going to do for phase 3. No way. That is a recipe for disaster. Okay. You're going to have too much discontinuity. You're not going to have a plan of really where you're really going to. You're not going to be convincing the government customer that what you have in a phase 1 is really something they need right now, and they're trying to get you to phase 3 and accelerate that work. So we were very successful with this project that I have with my own company, because I've done 20 some odd ones before, in that we were 4 months into our phase 2 when we were awarded our phase 3. The phase 2 was supposed to be a 24-month program. Now, we'd never expected that to happen that quickly. We happened to nail some things and do some back testing, showing dramatic improvements that we could display immediately. And we didn't have any AI involved. We didn't have machine learning even. We just had our basic guidance system that we displayed to the government, back tested, and showed the dramatic effect we can have. And they went right to a phase 3 with us. So it can happen, but you need to line those things up from the very beginning. You got to know what you're doing, and you should be communicating, working, and have that working relationship. I also had a very good relationship with the TPOC along the way, quite honestly. So, and he had trust. We had known each other, well before we ever got into an SBIR, and that helped dramatically along the way. So yeah, a lot of the one thing that is, as far as talking to my younger self, I should say, back, say 10 years ago, is, I've got an MBA, I've got an MS, I'm mechanical engineer, manufacturing engineer, I've got the technical chops and the business side, but I always worked in a corporate environment, and raising funds privately for government applications from VCs is a challenging thing to do. There's a lot of VCs that have no interest in government dual use technology whatsoever. And finding those and understanding those and ferreting out who's who in the zoo is challenging. So because a lot of the VC folks and finance folks, they don't speak technical, and they don't even necessarily speak DoD or market, in a lot of ways. They just want to see financial returns. And if I had a better network, now, if I had prepared for that earlier, that would be very helpful for to tell my older self. Over.
Thanks, David. Actually, maybe we'll stick with you, because we started getting into the topic of progressing through the program. And
Okay.
In our prep, you talked about eloquently the 3 valleys of death, and then relating technology readiness levels with the SBIR program. When we've analyzed the program, the likelihood of someone sticking with one office, from phase 1 to phase 3, is much lower than someone who works with multiple offices, to progress.
Right.
So, maybe give your thoughts on that. We have a question of, potentially I don't know if I'd use the word graduating, but, transitioning out of, SBIR to OTA from a progression point of view. So, feel free to take a view of progression.
Yeah, there's a whole lot there, and I don't want to take over the whole conversation, but tracking. So first of all, if people are not familiar with technology readiness levels, you need to understand that significantly. And not to do a shameless plug, but our platform, if you go to 9high.com, check it out. We do have a lot of tools there that help you understand that and help you understand how to progress from one technology readiness level to another. So those valleys of death you're talking about, the Navy actually has a very nice model showing the 3 different ones where you're going to be stepping through. So what people get a little confused, because they think it's really just about funding. Okay. So it's true that you have dropped into that valley of death when you run out of funds, okay? But what is causing that along the way? What's causing it is a lot of risks that are in front of the team that they need to burn down. And are you hitting your objectives and your goals against your stated cash burn plan? Because if you're not, and you're burning cash faster than you can reach your objectives and your goals, then essentially you're going to be in that valley of death and you're going to be starving for funds along the way. So you need to make sure that you're making that progress and that you're going from TRL, whatever it might be, 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. Typically a lot of these SBIRs are more like TRL 6, 4, 5, and 6, and of course you're all the way up to TRL 9 when you deploy. So what we do, and it's a process that we built into the software platform, is to be able to provide guidance to people and understand what are those risks in front of you. Because it's not just about running out of money, it's about maturing your own organization. It's about maturing that technology. And it's about maturing the end application, because that technology in the end has to be able to merge into the end DoD application in a way. So there's a lot of moving pieces to it. It's not an easy thing. So even for a guy with technical and business background, formal, major corporations I work for, it's still a challenge. There's a lot of spinning plates that you got to keep spinning, and a lot of progress that you have to show with sometimes limited funds. So you need to be able to prioritize, you need to be realistic about what that is. And that's why I also brought up the other funding along the way, because you're going to need additional funding than just the SBIR. And you brought up another good point, Mike Crosby, that there's also these OTAs that you can go to. There's other forms of contracts that you can get, and you can get those in parallel. It's not like you have to do just a phase 2 to prove something before you go and reach out to a consortia. There's a new consortia that just started up. Mike Teapot was Anthony DeStasio at OUSD. He was at Defense Production Act at the time. And one of his dreams, he just materialized. He just created the Defense Industrial Base Consortium. And it's free. People can go and sign up right now. They just did an open call for white papers this morning. Contact me. I'll send you all the everything you need to do. You will need a DD 2345 that I mentioned before in order to join. But there's very low hurdles to get in there. And you can then meet with your government customers. You can find these other contracting opportunities. And you should have multiple contracts going in parallel. That way you're reducing your risks of losing one along the way and running into that valley of death. So it's by increasing your bandwidth of contracting that's going to help you a lot as far as being successful on the way. I think I hit most of the points along the way.
That was great. That's a great playbook for everyone.
Yeah.
Over to you, Josh.
Yeah, I'd probably echo a lot of the same. Especially when it comes to the having different contracts in play to keep yourself moving. And I think that maps back to socializing what you're doing and kind of what challenges you're trying to solve across the DoD. For us, when I was at Blue Point, we did phase 1, phase 2 through Space Force. We did a phase 3 through OUSD. We did a phase 3 through Navy. That became a sole source IDIQ. And then we came back and did another phase 3 with Space Force. So Space Force was still kind of moving at their pace, and we were kind of stuck between phase 2 and phase 3 because they were still navigating how to kind of bring this out at scale and things like that. So it was really important that we had the diverse kind of projects in play across the DoD, and that kept us going and kept us socializing. And the more that we could point back to the success we were having, the more agencies that would raise their hand to explore it and be interested in it. So I think driving that demand is super critical. I think I've seen too many organizations that will, and you see them at trade shows, like they'll have a booth up where they've gone phase 1 and phase 2 and they're just stuck, and they keep begging the same agency to go phase 3, but things change in an agency that aren't even related to you. You could have a changeover in terms of leadership. You could have a changeover in terms of priority, things that they're just not privy to. And if you're just sitting there hoping that they carry you and help you grow into this much larger business, you're just not understanding, their priorities and their mission. So definitely prioritize that and definitely understand kind of the mission of each of these orgs as you're presenting what you're capable of doing, and definitely get multi-threaded across agencies for sure.
Thanks, Josh. Mike, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, they both crushed it. So I'm glad I can just pick up the crumbs on the back end. Thank you for doing all the heavy lifting. The thing I would offer here is, based on your TRL of whatever the hardware software is, remember that you don't have to start with a phase 1, right? You can go right into a phase 2 if your hardware software is ready and you feel like you're ready to demonstrate that. if you have the time, the bandwidth, the capital, the burn rate's not super high, right? If you have VC backing and whatever the thing is, sure. If you want to start at phase one, that's the safe way to go. Lay it out on paper, right? Low dollar amount, SBIR. Feel free to do that. As a TPOC, I was actually talking with one of the AFWorks SMEs yesterday about kind of some of the changes that have gone through the AFWorks SBIR process and things that are happening then. Were happening when we were young and cool, and not much has changed, quite frankly. I had many companies that I put on a phase one, and what we found through the phase one is that the company could not actually deliver what they said they were going to deliver. I've also put many companies on a phase two that could not deliver what they said they were going to deliver, right? But I've also had it work the other way around, where I kicked myself when I had a company go into a phase one, and I was like, we should have gone phase two. You could have delivered a technology so much earlier. I could have given you more money because the need is greater, right? So having those conversations with your TPOC early are huge.
All right. Awesome. I think you guys crushed that topic. It's come up with a few times. So the notion of partnering from a couple different angles, from a financing point of view, if you're looking at venture capital, you see, private equity drifting into defense tech. I think I just read a study that literally came out this morning looking at, $60 billion that's been invested over the last 3 years by the VC community in defense tech. Then there's the notion of, working with bigs as a way to fulfilling, a need around a larger project or a potential investment or acquisition path, for your, company. So it's a pretty broad topic. Josh, maybe start with you on this one, the notion of partnering.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably two lenses I look at this through. First is kind of probably the same thing I've been saying, right? You expect, a lot of organizations expect an agency to, help them grow as a business and find the right fits. That same mentality carries a lot of times to the prime contractors as well, where you think these larges are like, hey, you already, manage these large weapons platforms or have these large capabilities. I can plug right in, just let me plug right in. There's got to be a need that they see, or you have to be bringing an opportunity to them for them to want to do that, right? You can't go in there thinking that they're going to do all the work for you. You've got to be willing to do a lot of it yourself. And that means, again, getting in front of the right government customers. But I'd say when it comes to the investment side, so for us as an organization, we got acquired after we got our sole source IDIQ with the Navy. So we went from a 13-person company and we got acquired by a Series D 700 plus company that was growing really quickly. And they were very interested in our defense footprint, but also bolting on some of their products that they already had into ours to make a really robust product. That became really attractive to the marketplace. But one thing we didn't know was as soon as that bigger org comes in and acquires you or kind of brings you into their fold, is no longer am I going to be able to go after things like small business set-asides, which primes really like. Like, hey, you've got this great technical capability. We can wrap our services around it. We can take advantage of your small business, set aside. We didn't have that anymore. So just being very mindful of, yes, investment up front. And pre-call with Dave. Dave knows the ins and outs of kind of when to do it and kind of the taxes associated and things like that. But be very mindful that, it's great to have that investment up front to definitely have the cash flow that you need to continue to go through programs like this. But also understand what is 6 to 18 to 24 months look like down the road, and how does it affect your potential to go elsewhere within the market. And again, it's going to be a unique case for everybody based on capability and company size and who's interested in all that. But definitely, probably really important to be forward thinking about any activities that you take when it comes to the investment side or partnering side of things.
Thanks, Josh. And Mike, what have you seen as some of the patterns of best practice?
Yeah, so as I've gotten older, and I had an opportunity to put, when I was in Blue Horizons, on a very small government-only team. There were 3 of us total with no space experience. The Air Force gave us an opportunity through an academic, I guess, time horizons in our career, where we were able to dedicate 1 year to getting another master's degree, which wasn't particularly valuable to most of us. Once you have 2 or 3, right, you just start throwing them in the box. But the thing that was most valuable was access to R&D money through AFRL, and then access to time to research a problem and companies, right? So I kind of jokingly say that the degree is interesting. I have all these books that are stacked up on the wall, and they ultimately helped, but the value proposition there was the time and the money. So during that time in Blue Horizons, we pursued a space project, and I'll say the company name here, and folks can go out and Google them. But we worked with True Anomaly. They started out as like a 5-person company. The interesting thing about them was that they were all previously, the founders were all previously Space Force weapons officers. And that means something to me, right? Because as a weapons officer, that's, for those unfamiliar, it's basically the naval equivalent to going through like Top Gun, right? So they are the experts in their field, and that automatically bought them credibility from a partnering perspective. So when I talked to them, I knew that they could get after the problem we wanted. They knew they had the networking piece built in already, coming recently, very recently, out of the space community. And then what I knew was that space is expensive, right? So they had to buy in the deep, build in the deep ties with the venture capitalist side of the house. And I think to David's earlier point, there are a lot of VCs out there that have zero interest in doing business with the government. But what I've seen over the last 3 years is that there are VCs who a large percentage of their portfolio is government based, not because they think that's where the big money and the contracts are going to come from, but because they're great Americans and they want to do the right thing for this country, right? We actually talked to 3 of them recently, who have then tied into a new Air Force office, the Office of Strategic Capital, to then supercharge more companies, right, and let folks in. I also worked with another space company that 3D prints rockets. Probably doesn't take long to draw the tie for who that is. That actually voluntarily tied in with Lockheed Ventures to act as a funding realm, and I didn't get too far into that because we were looking to put them on contract. But there were opportunities there from one of the primes, right, to act as a venture to then fund and help there, and then get all the tie-ins from the Lockheed networking, et cetera. And then what I would offer from a government side and partnering is challenge your TPOC to partner with as many people as possible across as many services as possible, so that when you have your leadership change, like was discussed previously, or the allocation of money to specific R&D type efforts changes, you can continue your effort and then have a roadmap to off-ramp into a phase 3 with another organization or another DoD entity. And quite frankly, the greatest part of doing a SBIR is being able to sole source with the government, right? So even though you may sunset a project with the Air Force because that wasn't their goal, having the partnership built on the government side makes it very easy for you to reach out to your government TPOC and say, hey, who else was working this? Who else were you talking to? And then get a contract with the Navy or the Army or whoever that is.
That's great insight, Mike. Coming up to about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to change topics. And Dave, you mentioned your right brain and left brain skills of having a mechanical engineering degree and an MBA. I think when we analyze offices that use SBIR as part of their toolkit, in general, the leaders of those offices have at least a couple degrees, and they're 95% STEM. So I don't want to officially say they're left brain, but most likely left brain. And then when we look at people who run a SBIR, they're often, technical people, founders. So maybe they're, I don't want to totally typecast, but their sales skills and marketing skills might not be at the same level as their, development skills. So when you talk about like building out your team
Sure.
and your business when you think about, when to hire, your own personal skills, the skills of your team, financing, like what are your thoughts? Like, what are some critical milestones? I mean, Josh, we'll talk about like when do you hire your first kind of, revenue person. But let's start with you, Dave.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. So that's first of all, it's not even necessarily sales and marketing or even understanding markets. One is just basic communication in the first place. And so I have an engineering degree, and I've been trying to unlearn my engineering-ish skills ever since I graduated. And business degrees definitely help with that along the way. They help you to understand yourself, your leadership style, how to lead other people. But keep in mind, and this is a prime tenet that we have within 9 High itself, is that the technical risks that you have in being successful are only 1/3 of the total risks you need to overcome. So if you think that you're just going to have a technical team and you're really smart people, and I've worked with brilliant people, and it's always fun, and it's always you're always just learning. You're like a sponge absorbing so much from these really smart people, but they're not business people, and they're not trained in business skills and business capabilities along the way. And from the beginning is if you're at TRL 4, okay, 4 and higher, you need to have process people, organizational people, and market people involved. They're not going to be out selling and getting big contracts on the sales side at TRL 4. But if you're not building in those capabilities, those things that make the technology or the product more appealing, to the end customer, okay? Because we look at it like you have, for a technology, we have, appeal, value, and reliability. That's sort of the sales cycle of what you're looking for when you're out looking for a new technology. It has to be appealing in the first place. So while a lot of engineers are focused on value, and they're focused on getting features and capabilities and things into a product or technology along the way, if there will be no adoption, okay, if you don't have some people with the right brain involved in your team. I'm working with, I'm not going to mention the name, but senior leadership at a very high level in the Pentagon right now. He wants us on contract immediately because they're having trouble with adoption of their technology. Okay, they've built out all the functionality. It's like eating, the K rations from World War II. It will sustain you. It will give you the nutrients that you need, but nobody wants it. And as soon as there's any other option, they're going to run as fast and far away from you as possible because they're going to have something else that's much more appealing to them. It's the adoption side of the technologies that you have. And if you don't have some of those people balancing out your technical team to be able to lay this out in a way that's very receptive to your customer base on the government side, speaking their language, giving them skills, having all those human interactions and human features that you're looking for, you're not going to be successful along the way. And we've proven that with our system along the way. So that's what we focus on, is making sure that you're bringing in, all those adoption kinds of things for your technology along the way. And you can't do it unless you have the right people on your team. And they can just be consultants along the way too. You don't have to be hiring people full time, or there could be other, channel partners, marketing people, other companies that you're working with that will help you with these types of things. And there's some really great consultants. Actually, there's a young lady came out of AppWorks who's doing a lot of this work, and she does it very, very well. So if you feel like your team is too far to the left as far as all technical, analytical people, we can help with that. We can let you know other people you can bring in that will just help on a part-time basis to round you out a little bit and make it a very successful program or product for you. Over.
Thanks, Dave. I like how you worked in the partnering there as well. Very creative.
Yeah.
Josh, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I'd say, especially with the time we have left, definitely to reiterate what David said, is you need the adoption of what you're doing. Like, again, you're never going to control the conversations that happen in the background. And a lot of organizations talk across the board. And if your product's not meeting the mail, it'll reach the next agency you're targeting before you do. So really important to make sure that what you're proposing and what you're positioning with the organization actually meets the mail, and you get adoption and satisfied users of what you're bringing, and that will get you better marketing than you can pay for across the board. And I think the more eyes that get on your product and use your product and are satisfied with it, the quicker your company will scale through the marketplace for sure.
Thanks, Josh. And we have one 30-second question. Question from the audience. I'll give this to you, Mike. How does the patent process affect the SBIR program?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would have to tie in with the AFWorks folks. I know we have gone back and forth about IP, right? Data ownership under a joint venture with SBIRs and who owns what when. I've heard the conversation go both ways with the lawyers. Somebody else can probably speak more adequately about how it's actually shaken out. Typically, the projects I've worked, I haven't tried to own any of the IP because all I did was provide vectoring and guidance. So whether the IP was software or patents associated with hardware, et cetera, quite frankly, Mike Rustom's opinion is, I just want to be able to access the thing that I'm asking you to build. Now, if you're using a bunch of government resources to build that thing and you couldn't have done it without it, that there's probably like, let's have a conversation on a discount rate or something like that, right? But yeah, that's basically all I got.
All right, so we'll, I guess for the audience, it's a question you should ask. Who owns the intellectual property? There was a great article that came out today about AI models that unless you're coding it yourself, no one owns it. So it's up for grabs if you're doing something with AI and Python and 90% of it came out of ChatGPT and you put in 10%, you only own the 10%. So it's still work in progress on intellectual property. Thanks so much to the panelists. Thanks, Mike, Dave, Josh. Great session. For the audience, we'll be doing a synopsis of this and sending it back out, but I appreciate everyone's time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks.